is having and they're planning on feeding people at the it's open to anybody. They're going to be having free bus trips here, so folks that can get there. 100 volunteers in 2 shifts, 1:30 to 8 o'clock. After this, come see me. Fraternity shirts, big way to show of what. So if you're interested now about my dream, and I made psychological evaluation, but the other not dreams, and in dreams, but in that dream, and heaven. And he gets louder. So I knew I was going up. It was a going up. He was headed up that same line. He obviously he was extremely good and hardly moved. So I said, what's going on? I just can't go any further. I'm doing pretty good. So he gets on my back and there's St. Peter. He says, hey, get a donkey out front. Come on.
Right, I got you. Everyone that did can.
Thank you, Jim. What from Florida, my dad, you'll know we got to keep our and was her parents were gone. Those of you who were granddads, it's time to have a grandchild. Have a way you do whatever, and we did. It was fun. Got some things to pray about tonight. Page 21 worked with us last week, and if it get everything as it's printed. Joe, is there a word that we can give them if it bothers them? What else? If it bothers them, if they don't like it because they're not finishing them.
Yeah. Oh,
get over it. So just know that. In fact, I'm going to give the last of last week's first here tonight because it will tie in, as you'll see, to lesson 6 as we begin to attack the father wound. So let's get right into it on where we stopped last week, and that is what every son, and really every son and every daughter, needs from their father. And so I'm going to list some of these things for you. The first one, what every son or daughter needs, the first one is time together. As a father, if you want to know how to spell love, you spell it T-I-M-E, because that's one of the most important things. I know if you're a son, your dad's still alive, or if he's in heaven or whatever, you look back to those times when you were able to do some things with him. And if you thought about some of this, as I told you last week, I can remember every time my dad and I went fishing, every time we went hunting, every time we played catch, because it is so special. It's just a time where it's just me and Dad. There's a lot of times when we do things with our sons or daughters, like our grandchildren, where we take them to ball games and we are at their games, or we go to hear the band perform and they're in it, and those are wonderful things to do with them. My dad, as I told you a couple of weeks ago, had 2 jobs, and he hardly ever got to see my games or any of the things that I did in school. So it's always good when a dad can go to those, but what that child wants is something that he can say, it's just me and Dad. And you need to trust me on this. Every child may fight it off, may complain, but he'll still love it. Some of you have heard the story of the dad who got really convicted because he hadn't been spending any time. Carl was his son. And so he told his wife, he said he's just 2 years away from graduating from high school, so I've got to make up for lost time. I'm going to take him on a fishing trip. So he went up to his son's room and he said, hey son, Saturday morning, I'm going to take you fishing. And the son just began to complain and gripe and whine. And I've got so much to do. He says, well, what do you have to do Saturday? He said, well, I told my friends I'd meet them at the mall. And he said, well, son, just this one time, I really want to spend time with you. And I want to do something together. And so I want to take you on a fishing trip. Well, for the next couple of days, the son just whined and moped around and everything. And the father was about to change his mind when his wife reminded him, you really wanted to do this, and I think you ought to follow through with it. So the morning arrived, about 5 o'clock in the morning, they got all their gear loaded up, and they hooked the boat up to the truck, and off they went to the lake. And all the way there, Father said quite a few words, and the son said quite a few grunts and groans. just didn't say much. And the father thought, well, it'll get better when we get out on the lake. And so they got to the lake and they unhitched the boat and they put it down in the water and the slip and got everything, got their lunches that the dad had made, you know, egg and olive sandwiches, and that's what we used to always use in Arkansas. And all the gear and the bait, everything was ready to go. They got in the boat, off they went, and so they're starting to fish a little bit, and nothing being said between them. The father just told them maybe he'll have a good time, and all of a sudden it starts raining. And it rained, and it rained, and it rained, and the father said, well, we can't fish very well right now, so let's at least eat. And of course, you know what happened. The egg and olive turned dough and olive, and the cold drinks had gotten hot, and so that wasn't a good thing, and it just started raining harder, so the dad said, well, I guess we better go back in. And so they got the boat out of the water and started back home, and the son put on his magic headphones and just listened to his music all the way home, didn't say a word to his dad. And when they got home, the boy jumped out of the truck and slammed the door and went running up to his room, didn't help his dad take care of anything, and his dad was so frustrated. And he went into to see his wife, and she said, well, how did it go? And why are you back so early? And he said, told her about the rain and everything, and he said, I'm telling you, it was the worst day I think I could have ever spent. He said, it was horrible. He said he didn't have a good time, he was miserable with me, and he made me miserable with him. We didn't get to fish, certainly didn't catch anything. The sandwiches were soggy, and the drinks were hot. It was just terrible. And so he said, I don't even want to talk about it. So he walked outside and saw his son go and get in the car with some friends, and so he thought, I got to do something with all this anger. So he went up to his son's room, and he walked into his son's room, and there on the shelf were all the little trophies from Little League and Pee Wee football and basketball and a couple of other little trophies that he remembered when they had such a great time together, and how he would carry his son off the field on his shoulders after he had pitched the winning game. And he just thought, where did all this go? Any of you guys ever felt that way? It used to be so easy back then, and now it's just horrible. And I don't know if I can ever communicate with my son, because I gave it my best shot. Well, he was walking around the room looking, and all of a sudden he looked down on his son's bed, and there was a little notebook that said, my journal. And he thought to himself, my wife told me that that's his private journal, and I'm not supposed to read any of it. It's his, it's private. As he picked it up and opened it. And sure enough, as he opened it, there was a pen there where his son had just written, and so he looked, and up at the top of the piece of paper was the date, today's date. And his son had written these words, the date and these. Today, Dad took me fishing. ... The best day of my life. Guys, let me tell you something. You probably already learned if you have teenagers. They communicate in a totally different way than we do. I mean, it's almost like they become aliens, you know, and the child is all yours, and all of a sudden they turn 13, and you can see why some animals eat their young, because it's just they're a totally different thing. But they're constantly catching things from us. And one of the most important things, as you'll see in this next lesson, lesson 6, that you can do with your son is build some memories. And I'll give you some books that you can look, but one of them is a book called How to Really Love Your Teenager, and we've got it in our library. But just ask them how to really love your teenager, and maybe by next week I'll remember the author's name again. But anyway, that's this. The first one is just Dad and me. Secondly, he needs life skills. Life skills. Here's what it says in Proverbs 22:6. It says, train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he's old, he will not depart from it. It's speaking of training up a child in a way he should go. That's adequacy. That's when he's old, he'll not depart from it. And you know why? Because it makes sense. when Dad has trained him in the way that he should go, he'll win at life. He won't depart from it. For instance, he won't just pull up the hood and look under there and not know anything that's going on, because Dad has shown him where the oil stick is and how to check the oil, maybe how to change the oil. My dad showed me that much, and I've told some of you, he showed me where the spark plugs were, but he never did tell me that you have to set the point and all that stuff, and that cost him a lot more later on. But he needs to know things like that. He needs to know how to check his tires when he's out. He needs to know, as I had to do last night when we got back, I had to help Cindy with a flat tire. And the great thing about it wasn't completely flat, so you know what you do when it's not completely flat. You either say, oh, it'll make it, or you go and get one of those little cans of foam and you fill it up and let Walmart take care of it when they take the tire off and it explodes in their face. But that's another story. He needs to know how to tie his tie. I told some of you guys in one of the other sessions, men's fraternity, that the night that I was to escort the homecoming queen across North Little Rock High School Stadium, I realized that I had to wear a tie, and I didn't know how to tie a tie. I mean, I was just 17 years old. I didn't know what to do. Couldn't find any of Dad's clip-ons, so I had to go across the street and ask the neighbor, Mr. Whatever his name is, Best, if he'd teach me how to tie a tie. And he tried, and then he said, let me tie it for you. Well, like my dad would have done. And so I got to tie them. But he needs to know how to tie a tie. And he needs to know how to make that little pucker right at the top under the knot where that comes together. And so we'll help you with that. But he needs to know all of these things. He needs to know how to write a check and how to keep up his account. He needs to know how to set his alarm and get himself up. He needs to know how to keep his room clean once he gets all the living creatures that are on the floor up. He needs to know how to do that. He'll know what to do when he and his date walk up to the door. He'll know what to do when they get around the dinner table before she sits down. Hopefully he'll know how to share his heart, and he won't feel like a fool in life because you've trained him in the way that he should go. Now the second thing that verse says, train up a child in the way that he should go. Should go. Some translations say, train up a child according to his bent. Every child has a certain bent, and this dad recognizes that bent, and as one guy said, he doesn't try to make an artist into an athlete, or he doesn't try to make an athlete into an artist, or he recognizes his boy's bent. Some of you remember that in the first year of men's fraternity, we had a guy named Bob Cleveland who was a part of men's fraternity. He's in heaven now. But Bob was a great athlete, all-state in baseball and football and probably everything else that he lied about. But he was a great athlete, he told me. And we had a lot of fun talking about that. When we got to this particular night, Bob gave a testimony of his oldest son, who was a great athlete in elementary school. But as he got into junior high school and high school, he wanted to get into acting. And his son, BJ, who's done several different things for us in our church, became one of the greatest actors in the Southwest. And Bob let him know he was just as proud of him there as he would have been if he was out there on the playing field. So you find out what his bent is, and you don't try to remake him into what you want him to be. You make him into what God created him to be. You don't make an artist an athlete. Those are life skills. Now, number 3. Son needs direction with solid why answers. Since it's 3 weeks away from election time, why do you think that you should elect a man who is against abortion and is, quote, pro-life? Have you ever talked to your son or your daughter about that? Why is that important? Why is that so important? Why is it important to say a man ought to marry a woman and a woman a man instead of same sex? Why is that important to you?
And can you and have you explain that to your son? Because those are big issues right now. Very big issues. And always will be. So he needs some solid why answers. Why do you believe in God? Why do you believe, when we had our scientists here this summer, why do you believe that the world didn't evolve over millions and millions and millions of years, but there are some plausible answers to why it could have been just a few thousand years ago that it was made, instead of what we were brought up on? He needs to know why you believe what you believe, and not just to hear you say, I believe it, you believe it too. It takes time to explain why. My little daughter Marcy, our second born, she came into this world saying the word why, and she would ask, well, why, Daddy? I remember one time she came up to me, and this was my favorite question that she ever asked me. She said, well, I won't tell you that one, but she came up to me, and she was about 3 years old, and I was in the refrigerator, and she said, Daddy, do worms yawn? I said, do they what? She said, do they yawn? I said, well, I don't know. Why is that important? She said, because I told my class that I would tell them tomorrow about yawning worms. Because I do know they sneeze. I heard one. All right. So those are great times to explain why. Why answers. Not just life skills, but what your philosophy is all about. Look at what was written to God's people way back there in Deuteronomy chapter 6 as Moses was finishing up his ministry and about to turn it over to Joshua. Here's what he said. And these words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart, and you shall teach them to your sons, and shall talk of them when you sit down in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. In other words, he said, Dad, your job is to explain the deeper issues of life and do it all during the day. Of course, back then, they would go to work with their sons. They would come home from work with their sons. The mother would take care of the daughters and educate them on the ways of housekeeping, and she would do teaching in the very same way. But that's very important. And of course, all of this begins with the Shema, or the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. And then he says, so you keep on teaching these words. The Lord our God is one. And telling what that means. So that's very, very important that your son have this from you. Some solid why answers. And let me tell you something. When he gets a little older and gets in college, he will try everything that you thought he had down solid. My dad had to have gotten so mad at me when I came home from my first year of college and I was minoring in philosophy. And of course knew a lot more than any of my professors. And I came home and told him about one of my philosophy professors telling me how the Bible wasn't literally true, and that after all, the story of Moses and the children of Israel walking on dry land through the Red Sea, and we found out that there's a part of the Red Sea that's up toward the northern coast that's called the Reed Sea because of all the papyrus reeds that grow up out of it that they make paper with. And so I went back to school, and I heard that at school, and I went back home and I told my dad, I said, Dad, you know, we may have been wrong all these years. And I said, my professor said that the reason they walked across the Red Sea was that was the part called the Reed Sea, and it was only about 12 inches deep. And I thought, I got my dad. And my dad said, that's an even bigger miracle than I thought. I said, what do you mean? He said, because all of Pharaoh's armies who had been raised around the Nile and were excellent swimmers drowned in 1 foot of water. You need to have some good answers, but you need to get ready because they will ask you some questions that you'll have trouble with. And guys, write this one down. It is okay to tell your children, I don't know. You don't have to know everything. In fact, you may be teaching them some of the best lessons in the world when you say words like, I'm sorry, or I was wrong. or I don't know. But now listen, especially if they're junior high age. If you say, I don't know, but I will do my best to find the answer to that question. And then you be true to it. And they will have forgotten in a couple of days what they even asked you, because they were just trying to get on your nerves. That's just part of the animal. But they'll be shocked when you say, you know what, that was a great question and I didn't know it, so I looked it up and I had a great time and I want to just show you what I found. All right, so that's vital, those why. Number 4, a son needs from his dad's convictions thorough modeling, his convictions through thorough modeling. He needs that. Let me read you something that I found today. You will leave let me say it again. You will leave in your son what you've lived out in your home. You know that old commercial, don't let him leave home without it? You'll leave in your son, and he will leave your home what he's learned from you in that home. It's not just what you say, it's what you do. It's the way you react to things, and your son sees that, and that builds convictions about life, and that builds security in his life. Here's the way Paul said it in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. Now, he uses this statement of fathering to talk about spiritual fathering. He says, you are witnesses, and so is God, how devoutly and uprightly and blamelessly we behave toward you believers. Now, he's not bragging, it's just fact. Because that was foremost on their mind. Lord, don't let us do anything that will make them reject you because of something stupid that I might do. So, he says, we behave that way. Just as you know how we were exhorting and encouraging and imploring each one of you as a father would his own children. Look for those opportunities to express not only what you believe, but why you believe it. Your convictions. When a father implores and exhorts his own children and brings convictions in him, that child sees those convictions and hears those words, and it makes sense. And when it makes sense, he'll respect you even more. And when you put all of those things together, the things that you say, the things that he sees, the things that you do, the things that you are, that integrates all that you are as a man, and it gives you, using the word integration, integrity. Integrity. How many times have we done things we've told our kids not to do, and we do them? We didn't let our girls go to R-rated movies when they were in junior high school. In fact, we didn't in early high school either. And one night we had some company over, and I was telling them about some movie that we'd seen, and I noticed that Stacy and Marcy were listening real closely. And after the people left, they had a meeting with me, and they said, Dad, you told us not to go to R-rated movies, but you went to an R-rated movie. And guys, I could have said this. Every parent has used this. When you get as old as I am, you can choose what you want to do. Let me tell you something. That's not a good answer. There have been more children who have waited for their 18th birthday to start drinking and doing drugs because Dad said when they were 14 and their friends were doing it, you're not old enough now. And then all of a sudden, they are. So one of the things that we did at our house, if I was going to tell my daughters not to go to those movies, I wasn't going to go to those movies. And that was hard because my buddies would talk about some of these movies that they'd seen and these action movies, and I wanted to see those. But I wanted my daughters to see integrity in their daddy. Number 5, and this is the most important one. Our children, our sons, our daughters, need to see Dad's heart. Every son, every daughter needs to be loved by Dad. And later on in the second half when we talk about sons and daughters, we'll put some meat on these bones. But every child needs to be loved by Dad and affirmed by Dad and blessed by Dad. In fact, if you're a dad here today, I don't care if you're a dad of a preschooler, as some of you are, or if you're a dad of a 60-year-old, as some of you are. Every son and daughter needs to hear 3 things from you. And I recommend that they hear one of these every day. Okay, you ready? Dad's heart can be seen, first of all, when he says to his son, I love you. I love you. We talk a lot about that for the rest of this year, about telling your son or daughter that you love them. Because we've talked to so many guys whose dad never said that, especially the World War II dads. Who came home from the war and men don't hug and men don't cry and men don't say I'm wrong and men don't say I love you. But that's not true. Every son has a deep-seated longing to hear his dad say, I love you. Every man needs it. Even the man who says, I didn't get it and I don't care, he's lying to you. Because down deep inside, there's a need that's gone unmet. So every son needs to hear his daddy say, I love you. The opposite of that, or the other side of that coin, is true, that every dad needs to hear his son or daughter say, Dad, I love you. Some of the guys that were in our first group in Men's Fraternity 1 had one of the finest men in this church. And he said, you know, my dad told me that he loved me, but till my dad died, I had never told him I loved him. And then he got tears in his eyes and he said, I've wished I could. And we talked about how he could. I suggested that he go to his dad's grave and stand over that grave and just say to his dad, Dad, I didn't tell you while you were here, but I love you. Now, I don't know if his dad can hear that from heaven. I'm not sure about that, because some people say they can, some people say they can't. I personally don't think they can see us down here, because it would break their heart in heaven if they saw the way some of us acted. And the Bible says there are no tears in heaven, that God will wipe those away. But I do know this, there's a big gossip deal going on in heaven. The angels talk about whenever one comes home, and if there's ever a time when a son comes home, like Luke 15 in the prodigal son, it's when a son stands by his dad's grave and says, Dad, I didn't tell you this before, but I love you. I love you. So guys, you've never done that. You don't have to tell anybody, because most people wouldn't understand that. But some of you have a deep-seated need to tell your dad, Dad, I love you. And the great thing about it, if they're in heaven, they can't gripe back at you. They can't correct you. They can't tell you shouldn't say that. Doesn't matter. In fact, if you want to, just go up and throw your arms around their tombstone and kiss them right on the lips. I'm kidding about that, but let's go. All right. The second thing, every child. In fact, I spent my whole high school career getting things under my graduate list. Getting things under my picture of things that I had done in school for one reason. I wanted my dad to open my annual as soon as I brought it home and to look at all those things under my name, because I so wanted my dad to say, man, son, that's good. I'm proud of you. Guys, I promise you this. Every man who has an ounce of testosterone in your body has a desire to hear Dad say, I'm proud of you. And for some of us, we may never be able to hear that because they've gone on. But it's never too late for your son or your daughter to hear that. I'm proud of you. The third thing, this first one is adoration. That's love. This one is affirmation. I'm proud of you. This is accolation. This is an accolade. Son, I've been watching you. And son, you're one of the kindest people I've ever seen. That's you saying to him, you're good at helping others. Or you're one of the best athletes I've ever seen. Maybe your batting average isn't the highest one on the team, but there's nobody who's a better team member than you are. So son, I love you. And I'm proud of you, and you're good. Some of you remember I think it was the second year we did the quest for authentic manhood. And I had some dads bring their sons to men's fraternity. Y'all remember that?
Yeah.
And I had the dads stand up with their sons and introduce their sons to us. And then tell them each of those three things. Son, I love you, and I'm proud of you, and you're good. You know that not one man just said, son, I love you, I'm proud of you, and you're good. Because as they began to talk to their son, they began to open up their heart and to share why they loved them and why they were proud of them and what they were good at. Those are things that every child needs to hear of Dad's heart. Okay? Now, with that in mind, let's move on to session 6. So if you'll turn over to page 22, we'll get right into that. Any questions about what we've talked about so far? Okay, you with me so far? All right, let's practice. What are 3 things that every child needs to hear from his dad?
I love you, I'm proud of you, you're good.
Now, let me just add a couple to that. Robert Lewis teaches that. Say it to the boys. Every daughter needs to hear that from you. But let me tell you something else. We found here in our church that every senior adult needs to hear that. A lot of them, their mates are gone, and they don't have anybody. My mother-in-law told me that for the 27 years she was a widow, the thing she missed the most from Walter was her hug. His hug. That was a part of the way he blessed her, and we're going to talk about that in the second semester, how to bless your children. It's a way to communicate with them that's phenomenal. It's a 3,000-year-old Hebrew practice. But our senior adults need to hear, I love you, and I'm proud of you, and you're good. Every man in this room feeds on that kind of thing. To hear somebody say, you know what, I love you. Now, it's okay for you to say it like Richard Ferguson does, in a manly way. Okay, you can say in a manly way if that makes you feel better and more secure about your manhood. I love you in a manly way. But let me tell you something. There are some guys in this room that I love that I would die for. I really could, because they've been friends, wonderful friends. There are guys that it's not hard for me to say I'm proud of you. Jim, I'm just so proud of you for telling that old joke, but I'm proud of you because what I've seen God do in your life. And Gary, I'm so proud of you because I know what it was before you were saved, and I know what's changed in your life, and it's wonderful. And Paul, his son-in-law, to see you taking the reins at your house, it's wonderful. And guys, it's not that hard to just say, I love you. Or, man, I'm proud of you, Gene. I'm so proud of you that you've made it through and you're getting your body back in good shape so you can walk all over the Holy Land with us this time. I'm proud of you. And then tell them what they're good at. Let me just say this about the things that you tell a child that they're good at. Find eternal things, especially for a girl. Yes, she wants to hear you say you're beautiful and you're pretty. Although my granddaughter told me this week, she said, you keep saying I'm beautiful. I said, well, you are. She said, I know. But she said, I hear that all the time. I want you to say something else. So I said, okay, you're pretty. She said, I hear that too. I said, well, what can I say? She said, just don't say much of anything. And then she told my wife, you know, these guys can really be, she's 6 years old, these guys can really be annoying. Annoying. Okay, so now, what do we do about facing this fatherhood? I forgot, did I leave my water back there on the, I may have dropped it and broke it, Larry. Hate it when my water breaks right at church. You give me a little bit of water, I appreciate it. Okay, let's face the fatherhood. Guys, I can promise you we're nowhere near going to finish tonight. In fact, I want to just, in case you have to leave early, I want to just tell you, do everything you can to be here next week. Next week, I'm going to teach you something that's not in your notes. There are some things that Robert's telling us to do. There are 8 of those things to do about forgiveness and reconciliation and all of those things. But he doesn't say exactly how do you get reconciled with your dad or how do you get reconciled with somebody else. I'm going to share my testimony with you about how I learned in a very succinct manner, very straightforward manner, and what became one of the easiest experiences I've ever had, and that was when I got right with my dad and overcame not only the first 25 years he and I had spent together as father and son, but the years and years he had spent without a dad. And so please, next week, please be here. By the way, if for some reason you can't be, you're able to go online, and so far you're able to get lessons 1, 2, and 5. Somewhere in the Netherlands, 3 and 4 are, but you'll be able to pick those up, and but not for at least a week or two after we've already had it, because we don't want you to miss any more than you have to. But next week, I promise you, some of the most practical wisdom I've ever received from a little guy who's not even married, and I'll be forever grateful to Bill Gothard for sharing with a bunch of pastors how to get right with their dad. It's just an amazing thing. So we're going to be talking about this, and we're going to address it. Let's just fill in your blanks first of all. You notice letter A, we're in the process of seeking to make sense of why we are the way we are. Remember, we said last week that Paul said that he didn't understand why he was the way he was. Over there in the 7th chapter of Romans, he said, I don't understand me. He says, I'm a wretched man. He said, the things that I know I ought to do, I don't do, and the things that I should not do, what? I do. And he said, who will deliver me from this body of death, sin, rebellion? Who deliver me? And then he gives us the answer, as we'll look at when we get to the heart wound. So we're trying to make sense of why we are the way we are. Now, 3 things I want you to know about that. Number 1, each of us has a story to tell. During the next few weeks, you're going to be able to, in your small group, to tell a little bit of your story. Unfortunately, you're not going to have the time to tell your whole story, and certainly everybody in your group's not going to be able to. But I'm just going to encourage you over the next year, and we'll stop the 1st of December and we'll take off until about the middle of January. If you do like some of us have done over the years, get your group together and maybe just take a night where you're eating together and you're not in a hurry, and you don't have your phone turned on, and just tell your story. Have you ever been able to tell your story? I mean your complete story. Just remember what I told a couple of weeks ago, where you've been able to just do that and nobody's watching their watch, and you're just able to learn some things about you as you're telling them things about you. Because every time I tell my story, I learn something else about me. So that's the first thing. Everybody has a story. Number 2, each of us, to some degree, is a product of the past. To some degree, we're a product now of things that took place. That's what these 5 wounds are. We said that almost every man has a father wound, and we'll be defining that in a second again. We said that a lot of guys don't even realize that they have a controlling mother wound. A lot of guys have grown up without having real close friends, and so they kind of spend their life in the shadows, hoping that they never get found out. And then we said that a lot of guys grow up without any vision, no goals ahead, and so everything in life becomes just kind of cruising through and hoping we don't make too big a mess of it. And then everybody is born with, and some people never get reborn with, the heart wound. And all of those are very important. And we're all products of things that have happened to us in our lives. Then the third one, each of us is in some ways controlled by the past until we consciously and willfully choose to break that control. You can go through life and be mad as hell at your dad. Thank you. Or you can be so put out with your mom, but not without repercussions. It'll come out. It's that old computer principle. Garbage in, what? Garbage out. It's going to come out some way. With me, not getting along with my dad meant that I had a hard time in my younger years with authority in my life. I used to just set my teeth when somebody who was my supervisor or a teacher or a coach would tell me that I needed to do something differently. And I would set my teeth, and I never understood why. Until later on, I found out that I would never be right with God and other authority over me until I got right with my dad. And that was the motivation I needed as a new father at age 25 to go and get things right with my dad. And I'll tell you about that next week. So, vital. Each of us, until we deal with that, it's going to continue to control us. You can go through life angry at your dad, but I promise you, that's not the way God wants it for you. And some of you are saying, Dennis, you don't know my dad, and you're right. There are some dads that are just down and out evil. But I'm telling you, for most of them, there's a reason why they're that way. And we're going to find out why they're that way next week. All right. So, with that in mind, go to letter B. We're exploring these 5 major wounds in life that shaped us. And the thing that we've already noticed a little bit of is that this wound is being inflicted upon sons at epidemic proportions today. I mean, think about it. If a son desperately needs his father, and his father is not there, the epidemic is 45% of the teenagers in America are trying to get by in this kind of day and age. Where I just listened to a news report this morning about a young girl over in Plano who she messed up on the computer and gave some pervert a picture of her without her top on, and he spread it around, and it went all over her school, and all the kids have made fun of her, and 3 times she's tried to kill herself. 13, 14 years old. 3 times. This past weekend she succeeded. She hung herself. And before she did, she made a video of all the things that had been going on in her life and how alone she felt. Guys, let me tell you something. There's nobody who's more important in your son's life than you are. Nobody can do it like you can do it. Nobody. And that's even if your son is 40 or 50 years old. There's still nobody like Dad. There is something inside him that still cries out, I love you, I'm proud of you, and you're good. So we're looking at these wounds that we need to closely examine. Now, with that in mind, I want to just show you something about this, that even in the Bible, it shows how important Dad is. That Dad is either a bright spot or he's a shadow. Either good or bad, right or wrong, empowering or disempowering, based on his presence or absence in his son's life. See, the Bible sees that too, the importance of fathers with their children. When you come to the last verse in the Old Testament, what's the last book of the Bible, of the Old Testament? Malachi. The Italian stallion, Malachi. Malachi. The very last verse, Malachi 4:6, talks about a prophecy concerning a renewal of spirituality in the nation of Israel. Any of you see the debate last night? Yeah. Three-way debate. Did you notice? Did you notice how few times God was even mentioned? I heard one. One time. We have forgotten him. And that's one of our problems. Well, God talked to Malachi and he said, I'm going to bring a revival. And I'm going to bring a revival to my people. And that revival is going to sweep the land. Now, if you were going to put a verse in the Bible, especially the last thing that's going to be said for 400 to 500 years, because the prophets didn't speak until one other prophet came on board. and it's this one that Malachi chapter 4 verse 6 is talking about. The last verse speaks to that revival, and then the Old Testament closes. If you were to put a revival in a verse, what would you say it was? You could say that in this revival people would be more regular in their church attendance, or maybe they would give to help more people and sacrifice for more people, or give of their own lives, or their marriages would be healed, or the moral climate of the nation would be raised. Those are things you could think of when you're thinking of a revival spreading out across the nation. But as the Old Testament closes, and as Malachi prophesies, he says there's a prophet who's going to come and bring a spiritual revival, and he tells us how that revival is going to break out. Someone was telling me on our staff retreat last week that they thought America's biggest problem right now is fear, because we don't know what's going to happen, and we don't know what the next shoe is that's falling. You know, they caught a guy today who was trying to blow up a bank that's just a couple of blocks away from Ground Zero.
Federal Reserve.
Pardon me? Federal Reserve. Yeah. We don't know, and so I could see why you'd say that, but I've thought about this so much, especially the last few years, that I think the biggest problem in America today is hopelessness. That our children, the biggest fear inside a 10 or 11-year-old is my mom and dad are not going to stay together. Biggest fear in adults is I don't know if we're going to make it. I don't know. We don't know. And we've seen some crises come where most of us have lost hundreds of thousands instead of just thousands in the market and in our annuities. But I think it's hopelessness. Just not sure that we can hope anymore. So with that in mind, here's what this prophet, and we know if you've read it, it's John the Baptist. He says, when this prophet comes, here's what it says. Go ahead. There it is. And he, John the Baptist, this prophet, will restore the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I, God, come and smite the land with a curse. He said, listen, the way to revival is when dads do everything they can to reconcile with their sons, and for sons to reconcile with their dad. He said that will bring a revival to the land. And guys, for those of us who are so tired of government and so tired of all the lies and all of the distortion of truth and all of the perversion and everything else that's going on, you can find hope in that. Because if you've got a son or a daughter or a grandson or granddaughter, or if you've got a niece or a nephew, or if you're just good friends with a family that has a son, you can bring hope in that young man by bringing peace in his life. He says this revival can come and will come when dads and sons get right with each other. If you've read lately the story of David, and that's where I am in my quiet time in the morning, in 2 Samuel, right before Bathsheba, that's tomorrow morning. You know that one of the saddest things in David's life was to be, first of all, hunted down by a king, but even worse, to be hunted down by his son who wanted to be king. That's a curse. He says, listen, revival will come when fathers do everything we can to get right with our children, and children get right with dad. But he said the other side of it is a curse. If we don't, lest I come and smite the land with a curse. Guys, 45% fatherlessness in America is a huge curse. And our daughters and granddaughters are going to pay the price for him not having a dad there to show the respect and the dignity and honor that you ought to show to the woman in your house. We're under a curse. Francis Schaeffer said, a lot of people are wondering if judgment is coming. He said, let me tell you something, judgment has already come. When since 1973, an average of 1.4 million innocent little babies, most of whom have been killed in their mother's womb without any say-so, simply because the mother did not have time or saw it only as a mass of protoplasm rather than a baby. He said judgment has already come in the form of 63 million unborn babies. Amazing. Now, revival can come with that through the Father. Let's go back and just review, and then I'm finished. Let's go back and review what that definition was. Go ahead. There it is. The absent, no, you had it. The absent father wound. Next slide. There it is. An ongoing emotional, feeling-wise, social, relationship-wise, or spiritual, heart-wise, deficit, ordinarily met in a healthy relationship with Dad, that must now be overcome by some other means. And we introduced that as the second object in the suitcase last week. That a lot of guys try to make up for the dad who's either not there at all, never has been there at all, or he's in the house, but he's not in the home. So he has to go to mom. And thank the Lord for good moms, but heaven help the guy who tries to make it without his dad. And guys, we're going to look next week at some of the myths that guys have believed over the years about boys making it without their dad. Oh, he'll make it all right. A year or so, he'll be fine. Or he'll get over it. Or we'll do lots of fun things on weekends, and even though I'm not with him the other 12 days of the 2 weeks, he'll be all right. No, he won't. Some of you know that from first-hand experience. And guys, all of that to say this. We've got to do as men, we've got to step up when it really counts, which is right now, and do everything we can to be right with our dad, or as dads, to be right with our sons and daughters. And I promise you, next week I'm going to give you such, it's going to sound so simple, and yet I can promise you it was the hardest thing that I can remember doing in the first half of my life. But we're going to talk about attacking this father wound very specifically next week. Brother Larry?
I don't know if y'all realize how great it is to hear this, but I'm telling you, let me give you two experiences of how well this works. One was I hug men most of the time, embrace them, and tell them I love them. I've had men cry on my shoulder. I've never heard that. And now they expect us when they see my shoulder. And I enjoy that. The second thing is, I was at work, and I was having a conversation with a man that was very intelligent, a lot more so than I. And I began to tell him about men's fraternity and what we did at church. And then I said, sometimes you'll find men that act like women. I said, you'll find out that they're whiners. And I said, and I found out in men's fraternity, it's because they were raised without a dad. He just stuck his head. He said, maybe that's the reason I'm the way I am. He said, I need to hear that. Unfortunately, he's going to California now. But you'll find out, if you take these teachings, you'll be able to look at people and tell that they have the wound. And you can help these men become better men. I just want to thank you, Thomas, for being here today. I looked over here. Man, I tell you what, I love to see young men learning this. This will save your family. It'll save your marriage if you get it early enough. But there's nothing to keep you from going back and applying it to your life. Let's bow our heads. Father, I just want to thank you for men's fraternity and what it means to me. I want to thank you for what it means to my family. want to thank you for what it's taught my son, taught me especially. I want to thank you for Bob Taylor, a great man that acts like a dad to all men. I thank you, Father, that Dennis spends so much time preparing for this. He understands each sentence that he speaks, and sometimes it's not taught, it's caught by looking at his ways, the way he lives his life. And I've got to see it in operation, Father. I thank you for that. I pray that you would bless these men. I pray, Father, that you would bless their families with this teaching. And Father, help them to grow